Welcome to our discussion, Translation Based on Performance, from Greek Performance to Target Performance. Oral Bible translation based on performance brings new questions. 50 years ago, the paradigm for unwritten languages was to develop literacy and publish a written Bible. Today, there is an increasing recognition that oral societies can receive an oral translation directly, with or without an accompanying written translation. Best practices would suggest that such translations should be based on the original text. When we prepare a performance, we may start with our common sense of the world and our knowledge of the ancient world. We do not choreograph or reformat according to our personal feelings. We carefully let all the cues in the original text inform all the aspects of our performances. These cues in a Greek text are many and more than might be anticipated by focusing on intermediate written translations. Just listing these cues used in preparing this performance can suggest how much untapped information might be lost if basing a performance on a translation rather than the original. I'll read through them quickly. They're listed in the handout that can be downloaded. Original word choices, implicit and explicit choices, default salient material, that is, comment material that is not grammatically marked, topical or contextualizing material that is grammatically signaled, that is, marked topical material. Grammatically signaled focal material, that is, marked salient material. Comment material that is grammatically signaled. Pace. Afterthought. Unit chunking. Repetition. Parenthesis. Specificity. Conciseness. Sound patterns. Comparison. Antithesis, cultural background, exegetical resolutions of meaning, text critical questions, punctuation for the original. These are some of the kinds of cues found in a canonical Greek New Testament text. However, illustrating all these cues with examples from John 1 through 18, and providing adequate discussion would take much more time than we have here. Instead, we'll discuss some of the more influential cues and point out some of the places of ambiguity, even in the source. Original word choice. You can see these in the handout. Original lexical items need to be discussed both in the relationship to their abstract and contextual meaning and against the other options that were not chosen in the original. The last consideration is very helpful and is part of any translation process from any language. Consider logos in John 1:1. In the beginning, there was the logos, and the logos was with God. If I were C.S. Lewis, I could try, in the beginning was storying. But John did not write the Iesis, story, and I'm not C.S. Lewis. Nor did John write Angelia, message. He did not choose lexis, vocab item, phrase, rima, saying, vuli, advice, sophia, wisdom, enua, thought, nous, mind, gnosis, knowledge. For Origen, the Christian scholar in Caesarea, people share in the logos, that is, reason and speech, by not being alogos, irrational. Reason and thought are included in logos. And the message, content, and oral delivery of the message is also included. For John, there is partial concordance with the Greek Old Testament, where prophetic messages are sometimes introduced by rima, saying, and sometimes by logos, speech. Ancient Jewish interpretation linked God's command in Genesis 1:3, let there be light, with God's wisdom. And this shows up in Philo as the logos, the divine mind, divine wisdom. In a modern English context, I think that word is best. It nudges out reason as a better fit in English and is closer to the Jewish background. default comment material without special grammatical signaling in the word order. Consider John 1:4 in the handout. Ke izoin tophos ton anthropon. The light is the new salient information. It's the reason for the sentence, the comment, but it is not specially marked as a focus constituent. It is using a default structure and a default word order. Access to the Greek text allows us to distinguish between default comment material and specially highlighted comment material. Our performance would want to not overly highlight this development in verse 4. It's comment, but it's not focus. Grammatically signaled topical material. This is material that can provide contextualization, creating a link to the context, a framework for the statement. We find it in many places. Verse 1, enarchi in ologos, ke ologos in proston theon. This happens with archi, beginning. Beginning serves as an introductory setting. Many linguists call this topic, meaning not the salient comment of the sentence. This can be confusing because it's not the subject of the sentence. Also, 1.1b, we have logos, where it is specially marked as introductory orienting material, and it happens to be the subject of the sentence. Grammatically signaled topic material helps provide cohesion in a Greek text. It contributes to unit chunking, but it is not focal material. And again, it is important for performance and for translation that it is not given the wrong kind of prominence. Now we come to focal material. This is probably the most critical feature for performance, and when it is done correctly, the audience is able to follow the main points and innovations of the message most easily. These are cues in the original text that help us develop a choreography that clarifies the author's original intentions. The very first verse has an excellent example where the logos was called theos, God, while at the same time signaling that this was special information for the audience. Many of the surprising turns in the development of John 1 through 18 show such focus. We'll look at a few of these together quickly. Verse 1-3. Panda diavtuieneto. In context, I'm going to read it another way first. Panda diavtuieneto. In context, panda, all, is new information and it's marked by word order. So it's a natural candidate for marked focus reading. And I would not blame anyone who did. The pronominal second constituent through the word, that's old information. It's also marked by word order, so it could be a topicalization. And Greek allows focused topic order, but it does not commonly use it. But this context leads me to follow the normal pattern here. That is that panda, all, was the topic constituent, and then a focus through it, and then followed by the default remainder. Listen to what the author did not write. Pande yeneto diavtu. All things came into being through the word. That's what John did not write. Focus on panda, and the diavtu through it comes in its natural place. But we must interpret what he did write. He wrote panda diavtu yeneto. We must explain the fronted diavtu, and a marked focus would work well as supporting and reinforcing the claim made in the first verse that the word was God. And John apparently treated word as contra-expected, as a contra-expectation, and so he naturally used a marked focus constituent. This is my reading, that the word was God, and in fact, it was through the word that everything came into being. 1.4 in the handout, enavto zoiin. Normal pragmatic ordering of a topicalization followed by a marked focus. The second accent in the printout expresses the natural high tone accent that I assume did not drop out when there were focus pragmatics. That is, because it's the focal information there, you slow down just a little bit. You're not in the normal word order, and by slowing down, you allow the original accent to stay there. And just as an aside, the Greek accent system doesn't record any of this pragmatic information. It was artificially applied about 1,000 years after that system was no longer used. Good, it stopped, that little beeping. Okay, the next verse. Ketofos entisko tiapheni. And again, we have a topicalization, tophos, entisko tiapheni, marked by a marked focus constituent. Verse 10b, ke o cosmos diavtua geneto, and the world through it came into being. It was through the light that the world came into being. This repeats the same pragmatics that we discussed in chapter 1, verse 3, panda diavtua geneto. And in verse 10, the topical information is o cosmos, the world. It's clearer and more unambiguous in verse 10 than the topic in verse 3 was. And through it is the focal constituent. 11c, and the world, ke o cosmos avtonu kegno. This is the first time that a personification is explicitly brought out with a pronoun in this text. The antecedent here is phos, it's the light. Phos in Greek is neuter. This pronoun here is masculine. It's the first time we get a real mismatch as you're going through this text. It's also fronted, and I think the reason for the fronting is the mismatch here. And the world didn't recognize him. Verse 14, another very similar styled sentence, ke o logos sarxe geneto, and the world became the word, and the word became a physical person. And the physical person is the surprise, is the unexpected, and it was brought forward as a focus. And again, I think we would hear that accent, sarx egeneto. Even though the official accent, you have to drop that high tone, put a low tone in there because it's in the middle of the phrase. But again, pragmatics, you pause so you get to hear the inherent high tone. Ke o logos sarx egeneto. So Christians, we may have expected this word order. Sarx is clearly focal. It highlights the surprise of the divine mystery. And again, I read it with a high tone. For time, I'm going to skip through to the last sentence. It's a nice conclusion as John leads us into the rest of the gospel. And here's his last sentence. Theon, udise oricen popote. God. So God is brought up front, and it's going to be the framework, what he's going to be talking about here. Now, let's think about God. As we think about God, for considering God, no one has ever seen him. No one being focal here. God setting this up. When we think about God, no one's ever seen him. Next line. Omonogenes uios, oonis ton kolpon tu patros, ekinos exegisato. The one, the only and unique Son, the one who is in the embrace of the Father, he's the one that brought the story. And he wants to explain just who this is. He's the only and unique Son. The Word is the only and unique Son that's in the embrace of the Father, and that's the one that's brought this message. And so, as we go into the rest of the gospel, John has done this very elaborate, well-crafted introduction to bring us to the rest of the gospel and why we need to listen, because it's the word and he's God, and nobody's ever seen God, but he's the one that's bringing his story. Now, no, I just read all that. Okay, now, some of you may have been listening to the pronunciation. It becomes a question when we consider performance. We're dealing with Greek here. Pronunciation has relevance for assonance, alliteration, and vocabulary choice, sometimes. We do not have time to elaborate, but I'll list a summary. It's in the handout. There are 9 kinds of stops. These are consonants like pa, ta, ka, and pa, ta, ka, and ba, da, ga. That's the old classical system. But in the first century, va, the, ra, or vita, delta, gamma, they had shifted into fricativization, and ones that many people do use as fricatives had just started in the first century, and that's where we get the phi, theta, chi that many will use, and all 6 of them are part of the system that has kept right on up into modern Greek. So we're using those consonants. More important, though, probably is the vowel system. I've been using a 7-vowel system for a long time. It is in your handout, and so we have E, A, E, A, O, U, and back to E, U, the rounded high front vowel. So that's a 7-vowel system. The Greek had coalesced into that, different mergers, movements. About 200 years later, well, this had already come, say, about 100 BCE. By about 200 CE, we have a 6-vowel system. And this has been an adjustment for me in this past summer. I've been using the 7-vowel system for almost 30 years, but I've adopted the 6-vowel system for this presentation because I'm strongly leaning towards using a 6-vowel system for an immersion program that would be run in a Greek-speaking country. Modern Greek has a 5-vowel system, but if I use the 6-vowel system, I can use that E vowel, and they hear E, and I'm a foreigner, and so communication flows smoothly. I've been told, oh, you sound like a Greek. You're a foreigner, that when they say that, but it works. If I were to say they for the word already, communication is blocked and stopped. That is just too different. I cannot use a for eta in a Greek-speaking country. So at first I was really bothered by that, but as I've looked at it, I think it's better than I first feared. The main thing that you lose are indicative versus subjunctive endings, and most of those are marked by a relator word any, like ina, in order that, okay, that's a subjunctive coming afterwards. And so if you can't hear the difference between the eta and the e, it's okay, because you already know it's a subjunctive anyway. Okay, that gets us through our pronunciation. Now, even though John 1 through 18 is a widely known passage with a long translation history, we'll see that examining the original text will let us see the threads of the text clearly enough to impact both a performance of the Greek and a translation into English. Oral Bible translation needs the original text every bit as much as written translation, maybe more so. In an oral translation project, a Greek performance would be discussed within a mother tongue team. The next generation of projects is probably going to have an increase in the numbers of members who do not read. That is, some of the language members will not be able to read any language. They will be fully oral members, illiterates, and they'll learn to engage Greek orally. And together, the team will process the oral Greek source and reach a consensus on how to perform in their language. After a Greek performance, we will demonstrate an application in English and the Greek's influence on a draft target language performance. And that will help us appreciate the advantages of working from Greek. The advantages of working from Greek performance go beyond what may be obvious on the surface. Of course, it's an advantage for the target oral translation quality, but advantages are not just accuracy, but speed as well. Performance translations based on Greek should need less revision and correction. The primary initial training will be in oral ancient Greek rather than oral English or another intermediary language of wider communication. As an additional advantage, an oral translation team that is trained in Greek will contribute to the long-term strength of the church in the language community. The so-called minority community will have the people and skills within them to access the original source, just like any other language community of believers. As an aside, they also have an innate pride if someone attacks them and says, oh, you're just listening to a translation of a translation of a translation, they will know, no, our people translated from the source. This is the real thing. Listen up. Anyway, they will have confidence and godly pride. And in the ongoing teaching, just like this audience listening to me in English may be confident and happy in their English translations. Let's look at this from the opposite to see what it is we may not want. We don't want our English Bibles translated from a French source. Nothing against French. Or a Russian source. Nothing against Russian. But we want ours from the original. Now, if it's not good enough for us to translate from a translation, then why would it be good enough for another language community? So, with access to Greek, the oral community and their translation are directly related to the original rather than being a translation of translations. So, with that, do we have a little time? Okay, there's just enough time. Nun. Εναρχή είναι ο λόγος. Και ο λόγος είναι προς τον Θεόν, και Θεός είναι ο λόγος. Ούτως είναι εναρχή προς τον Θεόν. Πάντα δι' αυτού εγένετο, και χωρίς αυτού εγένετο ουδε εν ο γέγονεν. Εν αυτό ζωή είναι, και η ζωή είναι το φως των ανθρώπων. Το φως εν τη σκοτία φαίνει, και η σκοτία αυτό ου κατέλαβεν. Εγένετο άνθρωπος απεσταλμένος παρά Θεού. Όνομα αυτό Ιωάννης. Ούτως έλθεν εις μαρτυρίαν, είναι μαρτυρήσει περί του φωτός. Είναι πάντες πιστεύσουσιν δι' αυτού. Ουκ είναι εκείνος το φως, αλλά είναι μαρτυρήσει περί του φωτός. Είναι το φως το αληθινό, ο φωτίζει πάντα άνθρωπον ερχόμενον εις τον κόσμον. Εν το κόσμο είναι, και ο κόσμος δι' αυτού εγένετο, και ο κόσμος αυτόν ουκ έγνω. Εις τα ίδια ήλθεν, και οι ίδιοι αυτόν ου παρέλαβον. Όσοι δε έλαβον αυτόν, έδωκεν αυτοίς εξουσίαν τέκνε Θεού γενέστε. Τις πιστεύουσιν εις το όνομα αυτού, οι ουκ εξ αιμάτων, ουδε εκ θελήματος σαρκός, ουδε εκ θελήματος ανδρός, αλ εκ Θεού εγεννήθησαν. Και ο λόγος σάρξ εγένετο, και εσκήνωσεν εν ημίν, και θεασάμαθα την δόξαν αυτού, δόξαν ως μονογενούς παρά πατρός. Pliris charitos ke alithias. Ioannis martyri periavtu. Ke kechragen legon. O piso mu erchomenos emprostemu regonen oti protos mu in. Ke ek plirometos avtu emis pandes elavomen ke charin andi charitos. Oti o nomos diamoiseos edothi I charis ke alithia dia Jesu Christu egeneto. Theon udis oreken popote. O monogenis uios. O on iston kolpon tu patros kinos exeisato. Thank you. And now, if I turn to a team, I now want to put this into a draft of English. I'm going to present something in English, and I've purposely not polished it so that hopefully it can have some of the effect. When I suggest this to the team, there'll be pushback. We will work it over. Eventually, we'll come to an agreement, and that will be given to somebody to do the performance that will be published and sent on its way. But it starts by grappling with this and trying to take all of these cues and put it into English. So where are we? Let's see if we can get through some of this. It's always slower when I do that. So, okay. In the beginning, there was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was, in fact, God. This Word was in the beginning with God. It was through the Word that all things came into being. In it was life, and the life was the light of people. The light shines even in the darkness, and the darkness did not overpower it. There was a man sent from God. His name is John. He came as a witness in order to testify about the light, so that all people could come to faith through him. He was not the light, but was to testify about the light. The true light existed, and it gives light to every person who comes into the world. It was in the world, and through it, the world came into being. But the people of the world did not recognize him. And he came to his own possessions. And his own people did not recognize him. As many as accepted him, he gave them the right to become children of God, even to those who trust in who he is. These were given birth, not by physical means or the desire of the body or the desire of a man, but they were given birth from God. So, the Word became a physical person, and he stayed with us, and we saw his glory, the glory of a unique son of a father, full of grace and truth. This was the testimony. John testified, and he shouted out, "The one coming behind me has become in front of me, because he was my superior." All of us, we have received from his fullness. Grace for grace. Because the law was given through Moses. Grace and truth came into being through Jesus Christ. Now, when we think about God, No one has ever seen God at any time. The only and unique Son, the one that's in the embrace of the Father, he's the one that has brought forth the story. Thank you. And now it's time for questions, but I think those of you online will not get to answer questions. Anyway, thank you very much for joining us, and may we all trust God to bring this, to use us to bring all of these scriptures to the oral projects that are going to be started all over the world, all around the world. Thank you, and goodbye for now.